On May 21, 1976, Joanna Moore was arrested by the Los Angeles police for driving under the influence, causing an accident that nearly cost her her own life. The news not only stunned the press, but also sealed a harsh truth. The woman who had once appeared with grace alongside Cary Grant and under the direction of Alfred Hitchcock was now in free fall, left with nothing to cling to but the shattered fragments of her own life. Few would have guessed that Joanna Moore had once been one of Hollywood's most promising faces of the 1950s and 1960s. Her fragile beauty, melancholic gaze, and natural acting ability carried her into the ranks of sought-after actresses, placing her in major productions and sharing the frame with cinematic icons. On screen, Joanna radiated calm and refinement, and along with an unnamed sadness, something that made it impossible for audiences to look away. But behind the lights lay a completely different life. Joanna Moore carried with her a deeply unstable childhood, broken marriages, prolonged loneliness, and a quiet battle with alcohol and prescription drugs. Fame arrived early, but without any emotional anchor. Love came in waves, only to vanish faster than the roles she played. Each time she fell, she tried to stand again, and each time she rose, the cracks cut deeper. Joanna Moore's life is a painful series of contradictions between talent and self-destruction, between the brightness of the stage and the darkness of private life. This is not merely the story of a fading star, but the journey of a woman who never found a place of safety for herself. So, what truly brought Joanna Moore down? Hollywood, fate, or wounds that were never healed? Dorothy Joanne Cook was born on November 10, 1934, in Americus, Georgia, a southern town where life moved to the rhythm of seasons and family, where mornings began with the sound of doors opening and evenings ended under the glow of kitchen lights. She grew up in a small but lively household. Her father left for work each day. Her mother kept the rhythm of daily life. Her younger sister ran back and forth across the yard. And everything felt so steady that it seemed nothing could ever change. The accident came in 1941. A car was crushed on the road. Her mother and sister died at the scene. Her father survived, but never truly recovered. He passed away less than a year later. The rupture happened so fast there was no time to prepare. A house once full of voices became a space occupied only by furniture and silence. There were no explanations long enough for a child, only waking up and realizing that everything was gone. Dorothy was sent to live with her grandmother. A small house, a slower pace, care just sufficient to carry one day into the next. No one spoke much about the past. No one explained what had happened. Time passed in a state of waiting, waiting to grow up, waiting to adjust, waiting for something more stable. But that stability did not last. When her grandmother was no longer able to care for her, Dorothy was moved to another family. The paperwork was completed, belongings were packed, and her old name was no longer spoken. From that point on, Dorothy became Joanna. The new identity appeared on school records, on official papers, in the way people addressed her each day. The past did not disappear, but it was no longer mentioned. A child had to learn how to step into a new life without the time to turn back and look at the old one. Joanna's teenage years unfolded between two opposing forces. On one side, material security provided by her adoptive family. On the other, the persistent feeling of standing at the edge of every relationship. She attended Agnes Scott College, an all-women's environment marked by discipline and reserve. In class, she was not academically outstanding, but once outside the lecture halls, gazes lingered on her longer. A luminous face, an upright posture, a composure difficult to overlook. Beauty pageants in Georgia became the first places where Joanna was seen as an individual in her own right. Stage lights, names being called, public scoring, everything stood in sharp contrast to the silent rooms of her childhood. When she won at the state level, the first door opened. Photo shoots, meetings, informal casting invitations. People saw in her a face that belonged in front of a camera. Life's rhythm began to accelerate. Short trips followed one another, small cities visited, and then a return to her hometown. Ordinary days threaded between sudden appearances. There was no long-term plan, only the sensation of being gradually pulled away from the place she once belonged. Joanna left Georgia in that state, not as a single leap, but as the continuation of a series of displacements that had begun when she was very young. And her luggage was light. Her memories remained behind, along with old names and houses already left. Ahead lay audition rooms, film sets, and schedules whose duration was unknown. Her path into the entertainment industry opened in a way that closely mirrored her childhood. No promises, no guarantees, only doors that appeared and closed just as quickly. And Joanna stepped into it with an instinct formed early on, learning how to stand steady even when everything around her could vanish at any moment. There was no fateful audition, only a waiting room, a name placard taped to the door, and a metal chair where she sat until her turn was called. Actors lined up by scheduled time. Tape on the floor marked where to stand. Lines were delivered, lights shifted, and the next person stepped into frame while she had not yet cleared the hallway. American television in the mid-1950s ran at high speed, and Moore entered that system like someone newly fed into the machinery, not to stand out, but to fill the role that needed someone to do the work. In 1956, she made her first appearance on Lux Video Theater. A small role, no promotion, not central to the story, but it was her first time inside a real production process. The director setting the rhythm, the crew moving equipment, a scene completed and immediately giving way to the next. She learned the pathways of the studio before she learned anyone's name. Which corner held the makeup room, which staircase led to the parking lot when lunch break fell. Those came before knowing how long she would be kept on. A year later, in 1957, she crossed into film with Appointment with a Shadow. The movie made little impact, and Moore's role was not positioned prominently. Work schedules changed week to week. Her name appeared and then disappeared from the list. The costume went back on its hanger, and the next morning meant a different set. That rhythm kept her moving constantly between television and film. A morning might be spent on a TV set, the afternoon on another sound stage, then a few days later a return for a new guest role. There was no fixed stopping point, only short parts, short contracts, and the feeling of always being in transition. In 1958, Moore appeared in Touch of Evil, directed by Orson Welles and starring Charlton Heston and Janet Leigh. The working environment was unlike her previous projects. Larger in scale, bigger names, a tighter production rhythm. Moore was not at the center of the story. Her role remained small, peripheral. But for the first time, she was present in a project shaped by names. Hollywood was watching. She arrived, completed her work, and left as the machinery of production continued to turn. During the same period, she appeared in Monster on the Campus and Ride a Crooked Trail. Neither film became a turning point. Moore's presence remained brief, part of a structure that needed someone to fill a slot rather than a face being retained and developed. The hallways were so similar they were hard to tell apart. The same smell of paint, the same footsteps, the same waiting chair pressed against the wall. She finished one episode, returned the following week for another role in the same kind of room. There were no posters, with her face at the center. Only a small name at the end of the credits, passing too quickly to read. Film had not opened a central position. Television kept her appearing regularly, but each appearance was brief. The work was steady, her presence visible. Yet nowhere held her long enough to turn familiarity into a place. Hollywood at that time did not lack opportunity, but it did not lack replacement either. Moore entered many rooms, worked on many projects, met many crews. Each place opened its door, but none kept her beyond a single role. In that chain of movement, the clearest thing was not a drive to break through, but a quiet effort to find a position stable enough that she would not have to leave again the moment the scene was finished. In the early 1960s, Joanna Moore no longer walked onto sets as a stranger. Her name was called regularly. She arrived on time, completed scenes quickly, and left before the crew moved on to the next project. That rhythm of work made her a familiar face to American television producers, not because of glamour, but because of reliability. Yet at the very moment she was being used the most, a question began to take shape. Where did she belong among all the places she passed through? Five Fingers, The Rebel, The Untouchables, 77 Sunset Strip, Empire followed one another on a packed shooting schedule. Each set had a different lighting system, a different way of staging scenes. Joanna adjusted her marks, adjusted her gaze, finished the take, and the lights had already shifted to someone else. A half-finished cup of coffee left on the makeup table would be occupied by someone new the next day. In 1962, Joanna Moore stepped in to Walk on the Wild Side, entering the rhythm of feature filmmaking, slower, heavier, and demanding sustained presence. Lighting was layered carefully. Cameras repeated the same frame multiple times. Actors stood still long enough for emotion to settle before beginning. The air on set thickened. Every movement was calculated. Every pause carried its own weight. Miss Precious existed on the edge of the story, in spaces with few words and heavy shadows. The character did not appear often, but each appearance had to carry weight. Joanna had to hold her gaze longer, move more slowly, allowing the character to emerge through physical rhythm rather than dialogue. Some scenes were repeated many times simply to adjust a hand movement, a turn of the head, a pause before speaking. Long waits on set became time for observation. Joanna watched how actors maintained their characters even when cameras were not rolling, how they stepped into the frame as if they had always lived there. She began to adjust to that rhythm herself, holding emotion in her body so that when the camera started, everything emerged naturally, without being forced outward. Miss Precious did not place Joanna at the center, but it placed her in an environment where every scene carried consequence. The crew worked with her in a quiet, precise manner, keeping her longer within sequences, giving her scenes that demanded focus. There was no noise around the role, only work completed, takes kept, and the rhythm of production moving on. After the film, each return to a feature set carried a different state of mind. Joanna stood in those spaces as part of the story, testing how long she could hold her place before the scene ended and the crew shifted forward. That same year, Joanna Moore joined Follow That Dream, a film built entirely around Elvis Presley from the production stage onward. The entire schedule revolved around Elvis's availability. Scenes without him were often placed into gaps between major shoots. Supporting actors therefore worked in a mode of waiting, arriving early, standing by, ready to shoot whenever the central schedule loosened. The set did not operate like a typical film production. Outside the fences, fans crowded in. The press followed closely. Every movement of Elvis became an event. The shooting environment carried constant pressure from a cultural phenomenon unfolding in real time. Noise, security control, and the sense that everything revolved around a single person. Within that structure, Joanna had to perform inside a system with a predefined center of gravity. Camera placement, scene rhythm, staging, all pointed toward Elvis first. Her work demanded precision, stepping onto exact marks, keeping dialogue tight, reacting at the right moment so as not to disrupt the trajectory of scenes designed around the star. This was no longer the experience of acting alongside an equal partner, but of standing next to a phenomenon, where every frame already carried a central pull, and those on the periphery had to hold themselves steady to avoid being swept out of the structure. Television remained where Joanna Moore appeared most frequently, but The Andy Griffith Show created a situation unlike her previous guest roles. At the time, the series ranked among the highest-rated programs on American television, maintaining stable Nielsen standings across seasons. Any face retained within the world of Mayberry was no longer a fleeting appearance. It signaled that the show saw long-term usability. Peggy McMillan was written as a supporting character, but after her first airing, audience response was clear enough for the character to return. Viewers recognized the face, remembered her relationship to the main storyline, and accepted her presence as a natural part of the town. In the sitcom environment of that era, this level of recognition determined whether a guest would be invited back. Production operated on practical logic. Joanna did not need to re-audition or rebuild the character from scratch. She stepped onto the set, caught the rhythm immediately, completed scenes efficiently, and interacted smoothly with the main cast. With dense shooting schedules and tight deadlines, this mattered more than any promotional effort. As a result, Peggy was kept across multiple episodes. For a guest actor to return repeatedly in the same role was a clear industry signal. The crew trusted that person to fit the system, not a central position but reliable enough to maintain continuity. From this point on, Joanna Moore's name became associated with a specific character on television, rather than simply a changing face from episode to episode. It was a rare moment when the industry did not merely call her in to shoot, but held her for an extra beat. Afterward, the schedule pulled her toward other sets. Route 66 maintained its familiar guest star structure, but Joanna's position within the production process had changed. She entered sets as someone who understood the mechanics of pacing, grasping scenes quickly, holding character consistently, completing work within tight time frames. And for television crews operating under pressure, that type of actor was always prioritized. In 1963, she moved into family-oriented cinema with Disney's Son of Flubber. The production system here was more disciplined. Shooting schedules planned day by day, scene by scene. A broad target audience, a light narrative tone that nonetheless required precision in expression and timing. Joanna adapted by maintaining her familiar working style. Fast reads, quick immersion, steady rhythm, allowing scenes to function smoothly within a large ensemble. Around the same time, she appeared in The Man from Galveston, the pilot for the Temple Houston series, and returned to Perry Mason as Grace Olney. These projects did not place her at the center of promotion, but they kept her name circulating consistently in broadcast schedules and casting lists. Each appearance served as proof of professional competence, stable, flexible, and able to integrate into any crew without slowing production. In 1964, Bob Hope Presents the Chrysler Theater continued the pattern of appearances on large-scale programs. Once again, Joanna arrived, completed her work, and left. The familiar rhythm, no place to stay. On the surface, work arrived more frequently. Appearances became denser. Sets followed one another with almost no gaps. Television, film, major crews, familiar names. Joanna moved through all of it as a natural part of the machine. Her name appeared on shooting schedules, casting boards, and weekly broadcast listings. But the internal structure hardly changed. Each role existed only for a limited span. Each crew kept her only until the scene was complete. No character lasted long enough to become an anchor. No environment repeated often enough to feel like home. She continued moving, from one set to another, from one story to the next. Always needed, but never staying. Her presence was widespread. but always brief in each place. And within that constant motion, every new role felt like another test. Standing a little longer, staying for one more scene, to see whether this time might be different from the last. The middle years of the 1960s returned Joanna Moore to the familiar rhythm of television, where steady schedules and continued visibility were sustained by frequency rather than by a single major role. She appeared on The Man from UNCLE, My Three Sons, Peyton Place, Daniel Boone, Iron Horse. Each program its own world with its own crew and story. Joanna entered each space with the precision of an actress accustomed to quick pacing, reading the script, rebuilding the character's state, completing the scene, then moving on to the next project. Peyton Place carried a different tone. It was a series with broad reach and a loyal, continuous audience, and it was also intertwined with her private life, as Ryan O'Neal, her husband at the time, was one of the show's central faces. Joanna appeared within the same world, yet remained at the edge of the narrative. Her presence was familiar to television viewers, but it had not been shaped into a fixed, forceful image strong enough to anchor a leading character. In 1967, Joanna appeared on Bewitched as Daphne Harper, a former college beauty queen who entered the story with confidence and crisp, controlled interactions. The character appeared in only one episode, but was constructed clearly enough for viewers to recognize her immediately. Charming, in command of situations, economical in speech, and maintaining a measured distance from those around her. The role came through the production team's weekly casting cycle. The script already had the character, an agent submitted materials, the director selected a suitable face and moved straight into the shooting schedule. Joanna accepted the assignment, read the script, built the character before stepping onto the set. Everything unfolded in the familiar rhythm of television at the time. Sitcoms operated very differently from drama, and scenes were built on dialogue rhythm. Every reaction had to land at precisely the right moment. Every pause had to be exact so a co-star could pick it up. Joanna maintained that tempo by keeping lines short, looking at the right moment, moving cleanly. Scenes were repeated until the rhythm landed, and she held the character steady through each take. Daphne Harper did not return in later episodes, but the work was completed cleanly and clearly. Joanna entered the episode, built the character solidly enough to stand alongside the main cast, then left the set as the schedule shifted elsewhere. A new script arrived in a brown envelope. The studio address changed, the call time changed, but the pencils still underlined lines in the same way. Around the same time, Joanna joined Nevada Smith, a feature film of significantly larger scale than most projects she had previously appeared in. Directed by Henry Hathaway, the film centered on Steve McQueen, alongside established names like Carl Malden and Brian Keith. Within the ensemble, Joanna occupied a small supporting role, appearing briefly to serve the journey of the protagonist. And the production environment differed sharply from television. A longer schedule, expansive locations, and a rhythm built around the central storyline. Roles like Joanna's were placed within specific segments, completed according to the overall timetable. The character's position did not shift during production. Her presence remained supportive, contributing to the world the film constructed. A major film, a large crew, a position close enough to the center to nurture hope for a transition. Joanna entered the project with clear expectations. When the film was completed, her career trajectory remained unchanged. The role stayed limited in scope, and subsequent opportunities continued to arrive in the familiar rhythm of television. During this period, Joanna's work schedule was stable. Television series continued to invite her back. Each project brought a new character, a new setting, a new crew. Her face grew familiar to small-screen audiences, appearing often enough to be recognized, regularly enough not to disappear from broadcast schedules. Film remained present, but had yet to offer her a role large enough to create sustained momentum. Her reputation became more tightly bound to television. Some viewers remembered her through repeated appearances on the small screen. A familiar face, a familiar composure, a concise and precise approach to roles. Hollywood's star structure demanded something else, a central character, an image firmly attached to a name. That had yet to form. In 1975, Joanna entered the Hindenburg, a vast set, a long shooting schedule, and a large cast. Scenes were organized in clear layers. The central line held the frame's focus. Supporting roles were positioned at specific marks. Joanna took her place within that structure, entered the scene at the correct point, maintained her character's rhythm for the allotted time, and moved according to the established composition. The working environment demanded high precision. Frames were crowded, cameras moved constantly. Each segment finished and immediately yielded to the next. Joanna maintained her presence within each scene, stayed aligned with the crew's pace, and completed her performance within the shared schedule. When the film wrapped, her appearance ended exactly within the scope that had been shot. Joanna left the project and continued working with subsequent invitations. Film for her remained a series of individual projects, each time stepping in to work within preset structures. Alongside shifts in the industry, her private life began to directly affect her working rhythm. Prolonged personal issues made accepting roles more intermittent. Schedules were no longer continuous. The number of projects gradually declined, and invitations arrived less frequently. Maintaining a state of readiness, something that had once allowed her to survive the dense production churn of television, became more difficult as pressures outside work increasingly took up space. There was no sudden collapse in this period. The change unfolded slowly. Fewer roles, longer waits between projects, and appearances on screen no longer as continuous as before. Joanna continued to work, continued to step into films and series when invited, but the professional rhythm had shifted. No longer dense, no longer stable in the familiar cycles of earlier years. The slowdown began from within rather than on broadcast schedules. Mornings still brought scripts placed at the door, shooting days still began on time, but the intervals between standing before the camera grew longer. Television still called Joanna's name, just not as urgently. The set of 3 coins in the fountain operated with familiar efficiency. Lights up, scenes built quickly, characters carrying the story through transitions before exiting the frame. The work was clean and precise, as it had been many times before. When the crew dispersed, the quiet lasted longer than expected. No new shoot followed immediately. Sometime later, the Waltons offered a different atmosphere. Warm lighting, a slower narrative pace, stories centered on family. Joanna entered, held her character steady within the established world, completed her work, and then left the set. Everything ran smoothly. Only afterward, the phone remained silent longer than before. Subsequent appearances did not disappear, but became fragmented. Invitations arrived in short bursts, no longer forming the regular cycles of the early years of the decade. Within the industry, people grew accustomed to seeing Joanna return and then vanish again, not because she lacked the ability to work, but because the production machinery had shifted and her private life had begun to occupy more space in her schedule. In 1980, she appeared in Scout's Honor. The role was not large, but it marked that she was still being called back when a project suited her. It was no longer the continuous rhythm of earlier years, but brief returns, coming in, completing the work, and leaving. The familiarity of the set was still there, but her position within the system had changed. No longer a frequently seen face, but an actress returning through scattered opportunities. The gaps between projects stretched into years. By 1986, Joanna appeared in Run, Chrissy, Run, the final role of her career. There was no publicity campaign, no sign of a new chapter opening afterward. She completed her work, the film was released, and then there were no further projects. The appearances grew sparse, then stopped altogether. Joanna's name no longer appeared on weekly casting boards. And someone else sat in her old place in the makeup room. Mornings began while the kitchen was still wrapped in darkness. The switch flipped on, yellow light falling across the tabletop before sunlight reached the window. Joanna stood at the sink, her hand braced against the cold metal edge, letting the water run in a steady, familiar rhythm. There were no call times taped to the door, no scripts placed on the step. The day opened with a kettle set on the stove, a towel folded neatly, then a stretch of stillness while the house remained quiet. Willis appeared during a very early chapter of her life. Afternoons walking through town, conversations that stretched on without anyone thinking about tomorrow. Everything moved quickly, the way youth often does. Decisions made before fully understanding the consequences. Staying before knowing how long one could stay. They entered a small house together, carrying a simple hope for an ordinary life. That rhythm did not hold. Changes, trips, and jobs without clear shape slowly quieted the house. One day, they both left, each carrying their own portion away, as if they had merely passed through a stretch of road that never received a name. Don Orek came afterward, during years when Joanna had begun moving more frequently between sets. Their life was tied to suitcases set against the wall, and to late evenings when one person had just returned and the other was already preparing to leave. They shared the same room, but work schedules made time pass like mismatched pieces. Some mornings they drank coffee together in silence, listening to a low radio, then parted in different directions for the day. Those moments were not loud, held no major arguments, only the feeling of a quiet distance slowly widening. After a while, the house was empty again. Joanna packed her belongings, leaving behind walls that had once felt familiar. Ryan entered her life when studio lights had become a routine presence. They met during long shooting days, when each carried both fatigue and excitement from work in motion. Ryan laughed easily, spoke quickly, always moving with the energy of someone aware of being noticed. Joanna stayed beside him, keeping a slower pace, observing more. They began with hurried meals, conversations between shifts, then gradually, evenings that lingered longer in the same room. In 1963, they married. When Tatum was born, the house changed rhythm. A child's cries in the night, bottles on the kitchen table, blankets folded in haste. Joanna carried her baby through the hallway under dim light, soothing her with a very soft voice. Mornings began earlier, nights ended later. Ryan sat beside the crib, watched the child sleep, and then turned back to reading scripts. Work remained unyielding, but the house now had a new center. Griffin came later, bringing more laughter, more toys scattered across the floor. The two children grew up within an unstable rhythm, but always with someone present. Joanna prepared breakfast, walked the children to the door, returned to change clothes, then went to work. In the afternoon, she came back, bent down to tie a child's shoelaces, listened to small stories not yet fully formed. Ryan was sometimes home, sometimes away on location. The house functioned like a body trying to maintain balance amid many movements. But pressure crept in early. The phone rang constantly. Work schedules overlapped. Evenings were broken apart by work, meetings, relentless outside attention. Joanna often sat alone in the living room after the children slept, listening to cars pass outside the window, feeling the house was too large. Ryan came home late, set his script on the table. They exchanged a few short sentences, then fell silent. The cracks did not come from a single major event. They appeared in ordinary days, incomplete meals, conversations cut short, eyes drifting away when one mentioned the past. Joanna held the family rhythm as long as she could, kept the house lit, kept the children close. But then there were mornings when Ryan left earlier than usual. Evenings when Joanna sat longer before turning off the light. They separated quietly. There were no dramatic scenes, no declarations, just one day when the house no longer held enough space for both. Joanna stayed with the two children, rearranged belongings, kept change from arriving too quickly. Mornings still brought breakfast, still walked the children to the door, still returned to work. But at night, the bedroom felt larger, quieter, emptier. Cary arrived during a different phase of her life. The lights were no longer as dense, the days no longer filled with constant movement. They met within a slower rhythm, where evenings could stretch without interruption from a phone call. Cary did not enter Joanna's life like a new gust of wind, but like a pause. They sat together more than they spoke, shared quiet afternoons and unhurried meals. The house then was unlike the earlier years, no longer the sound of children running through the hall each day. No suitcases waiting near the door. Joanna planted shrubs on the porch, tended each pot of flowers, watched sunlight change across the walls. Cary read the paper in the living room, occasionally looking up to ask a small question. They lived side by side at a slow pace, needing few words, needing to prove nothing. And through it all, Joanna kept moving. Not to preserve an image, not to prove anything, but to keep those she loved within reach. Family, love, the houses she had lived in, all of it never formed a complete story. They were simply connected fragments of life, places where she had lived, stayed, left, and then learned how to stay once more. Sound left Joanna before she realized it was withdrawing. There was no explosion, no breaking point. Just a morning on set when a co-star's line arrived a beat late, then another beat late. Footsteps on the floor turned into vague vibrations. In the makeup room, people laughed and talked. She watched their mouths move without fully hearing the words, as if an invisible pane of glass had lowered, separating her from the rest of the world. Doctors named it in the early 1960s. Otosclerosis. A small diagnosis on paper. A vast emptiness in daily life. Sound retreated step by step, a little each day. No one around her noticed at first. Scenes were still completed. Lines were still delivered correctly. Only Joanna knew she was standing in a room where everything had been muted. She learned to see in place of hearing. When others spoke, that her eyes fixed on their lips, holding each small movement like a fragile thread connecting her to the conversation. On set, she read scenes through her co-star's eyes, through hand gestures, through the silence before a line fell. Sometimes the camera rolled. Everyone laughed at the right moment, and she knew she had finished speaking only when the lights shifted position. In 1962, the surgery took place. The operating room lights were so cold, they raised goosebumps on her skin. The smell of antiseptic clung to her throat. Recovery days stretched on. The hospital room so white there was nothing left to hold on to. When sound returned, it came in fragments. A spoon striking a metal tray, footsteps in the hallway, then someone calling her name from far away. Joanna sat still for a long time, simply listening to a familiar sound return. She went back to the set. Her name was still on the shooting schedule. Nothing outside had changed, but her body had crossed a boundary no one else could see. Other breakdowns did not arrive all at once. They seeped slowly into daily life. As the marriage fractured, the house grew larger at night. Alcohol appeared as a way to make the silence less heavy. On one drink after a day of shooting, then another. Evenings stretched on, the living room lights left on all night, the chair across from her empty. Stimulants slipped into the rhythm of living, needing no explanation, only to exist. The work was still there, but the gaps between projects widened. Days without call times grew longer, and each night ended with a half-finished bottle on the kitchen table, a glass marked with lipstick. The house still stood as it always had. It was simply that no one was waiting for her to come home. In 1970, the doors of Camarillo State Hospital closed behind her. Inside were long hallways, white paint, the smell of medication, echoing footsteps. There were no scripts, no lights, no one calling her name to step into a scene. Only meal times, sleep times, appointments with doctors. Days repeated themselves until it was hard to tell Monday from Friday. Familiar people came to visit, bringing clean clothes, a few small stories, then leaving. Joanna sat by a high window, watching the angle of sunlight change while nothing else did. The world outside kept turning. Hollywood stayed lit. She remained in a place where time did not need to move. In 1971, police lights flashed against the windshield, blue and red, reflected on a tired face. Short questions, papers to sign. The court stepped in. Custody of her children was no longer hers. And from then on, home was no longer a place to return to each night. It became scheduled visits, scattered phone calls, hurried hugs released when an adult said, "Time's up." Her career did not vanish overnight. Joanna was still called when there was a role. She still stepped onto sets, stood under the lights, delivered her lines. But each departure was followed by a longer wait before the next invitation. The phone stayed silent longer. Shooting schedules thinned. By the late 1970s, money was no longer enough. Tatum, the daughter who had once toddled around sets, was now famous, earning money herself. Envelopes arrived, phone calls asking whether her mother had eaten, roles reversed quietly, the child keeping the adult from slipping out of life. Tatum grew up between two worlds. On stage, lights, cameras, an Academy Award statue at just 10 years old. At home, empty spaces, frequent moves, evenings when no one knew what tomorrow would bring. Lawyers, paperwork, supervised visits. Family love did not disappear. It simply no longer had a stable place to live. Entering the 1980s, Joanna appeared in courtrooms more often than on sets. Drunk driving cases, reports, days spent signing papers instead of acting contracts. Work still came occasionally, but no longer held a central role. But days passed in rented rooms, mornings waking without knowing where to go, evenings stretching into discomfort. Her relationship with her children did not break. There were warm meetings, hugs held longer than usual, then stretches of distance, phones ringing unanswered, conversations stopping halfway because no one knew how to continue. The affection was there, but it no longer had a clear shape to hold. Each day resembled the one before, differing only in that the room was quieter, the lights fewer, the emptiness larger. Joanna kept moving through her own life, carrying fragments of sounds once lost, faces once beside her, and memories of brightly lit sets, where her name had once been called, then gone silent. In the years that followed, Joanna's life narrowed in a way few noticed at first. There was no formal announcement of retirement, no final farewell on a set. Invitations simply grew rarer, then stopped. The phone rang less. Call sheets no longer carried her name. A door closed without making a sound. The habit of work remained in her body. Each morning, she still woke early, brewed coffee, leafed through old newspapers as if waiting for a shoot that might come at any moment. But the day passed, quietly. No transport waiting, no makeup room, no test lights. Only the room, the chair, and the long stretch of time between meals. Alcohol remained like an old companion who would not leave. Nights grew longer, sleep fragmented. At times she tried to stop, tried to hold herself in a steadier rhythm, but her body had learned how to drift, and the years before left their marks. Health weakening, steps slowing, breath growing heavier after even a short flight of stairs. Her children still appeared in her life, sometimes close, sometimes distant. There were simple visits, sitting side by side, sharing a quiet meal, briefly recalling old stories. No more disputes, no more paperwork, only family members trying to hold on to one another in whatever way they could. Tatum visited more often, bringing food, medication, sometimes simply sitting beside her mother for a while without speaking. Time moved on like that until the mid-1990s, when her body began sending clearer signals. A cough that would not go away, breath growing shorter, fatigue that lingered even after sleep. At first, it was only fleeting discomfort. Then came days when she could not stay out of bed for long. Some people who had worked with Joanna remembered her not for a major role, but for how she showed up on ordinary days. She arrived earlier than her call time, sat quietly in a corner reading the script, folded the edges of the pages with her lines, and placed her pencil in exactly the right spot. When it was her turn, she stepped into frame, delivered her work cleanly and without excess, then stepped back as soon as the director moved on to another setup. On set, she rarely spoke much, but if a young actor stood uncertain before a take, Joanna was often the one who pointed out where to stand, gently reminded them of the rhythm of the lines, then moved away before anyone had time to thank her. No grand gestures, no need for recognition, just the habit of keeping a scene running smoothly. Within the family, memories of her were also not tied to dramatic moments. Tatum remembered very quiet afternoons, her mother sitting at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper, occasionally asking a brief question, then falling silent again. Not a kind of closeness that announced itself loudly, but a steady presence, knowing someone was there, even if they were not always speaking. Joanna did not talk much about work once she left the set, but she kept small habits as part of daily life. Waking early, keeping things neatly arranged, rereading old scripts, as if a phone call might still come the next day. These things did not form a grand story, but repeated over many years, enough for those around her to understand that she lived by discipline rather than by glamour. Not everyone remembered her roles clearly, but those who had worked with her remembered one specific thing. Joanna always knew where she was supposed to stand in a shot, and she was rarely in the wrong place. In 1996, doctors named the illness lung cancer. A small examination room, white light, X-ray films laid out on the table. There were no long explanations, only numbers, stages, and a future measured in months rather than years. Joanna received the news in silence. No panic, no dramatic reaction, as if her body had passed through too much already to be surprised. The days that followed moved between the hospital and the familiar house. Medication, appointments, examinations. Her hair thinned. Her face grew hollow. But her eyes retained the calm composure of someone who had stood under bright lights for many years. Tatum stayed close more often. No longer a child waiting outside her mother's hospital room, but a woman sitting beside the bed, holding her mother's hand through long nights. They spoke little. Most of the time, it was simply presence. On some afternoons, sunlight filtered through the window and the two of them sat quietly for a long time, as if no more words were needed. In the final weeks, Joanna's body weakened quickly. Walking became difficult. Her voice softened. Every movement took time. But one thing did not change. She still tried to do small things herself, lifting her own glass of water, taking a few steps across the room, as if she did not want to abandon entirely the familiar rhythm of living. In 1997, at the age of 63, Joanna passed away. There was no crowd, no lights, only a room, a breath slowing, and Tatum sitting beside her until the very end. When everything went quiet, there was no call of cut, no next take, only complete silence. Afterward, her ashes were returned to Georgia, where everything had begun. A southern town with a slow rhythm, familiar roads, an open sky. No sets, no lights, no journeys, only earth, wind, and the memory of a child who once ran across a yard before life turned in another direction. Joanna left the way she had lived for many years, without noise, without claiming the center, quietly finishing her part and stepping out of the frame. Yet somewhere, in old episodes that still air, in fleeting scenes, that face remains. As someone who stepped into many stories, even if not every story kept her at its center. Some evenings, cable television reruns an old episode. At the end credits, her name passes by as quickly as ever. Small, neat, barely long enough for a viewer to pause. A workday in her life once began with a sheet of paper taped to wood. Call time, scene, marked to stand on, then peeled away when the crew moved on to another story. Her life followed the same rhythm as those sheets of paper. Called by name, finishing the work, then taken down when the story shifted to the next scene. And in Georgia, where the wind moves across old roads, what remains is not the lights nor the legend, only a name that was once called on time on many days, and then no more.